Hey. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם אותי לעולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם כששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם וביום שבת וידפש שבת וידפש ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם ברי הגוון אמן לחיים. Okay, blessing for Torah Study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tziyah la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay, so Torah portion is Yitro. Great Torah portion. There's a lot in it. And what I want to focus on today is a little bit of information about what's referred to in the Torah as the mountain of God. Okay? The mountain of God. Now, if you had to pick the mountain of God, you would probably say Mount Zion, where the Holy Temple is built in Jerusalem. But since you know we're in Yitro and we're in Exodus and we're not getting to Israel, we don't get to Israel at all from this point forward until the Torah is over and then we go into the book of Joshua, that we're probably talking about a different mountain from which you would probably think that the mountain of God has something to do with Mount Sinai. But there are a variety of different names for Mount Sinai, as the Mishnah tells us. There's multiple names for Mount Sinai that are referred to in the Torah, and the question is, well, why does one mountain need so many different names, and what can we learn from the essence of what is essentially Mount Sinai, and why is that mountain so important that the Torah had to be given there and only there? So as we build up to Yitro, I just want to show you a couple of other places early on that we've already passed, but probably very easily missed without thinking much about it. But now if you look at it, hopefully in the way that I'd like to show you, you'll see a buildup of Mount Sinai and how interesting it is. And then later on, maybe we'll figure out something better. So, but already, you'd want to understand that there are a few coincidences that happen. Moses leaves Egypt and he goes to a well. Now, at the well, there are a bunch of women. So this is a chicken and egg. Did he go to the women? Well, did he go to the well because that's where the women are? Or did he go to the well because well is water, which is a synonym for Torah, which is what he's looking for? Or is he looking for everything? So, I point out, my wife's here, I can point out I met my wife at a pool. And so So it's pretty similar to Moses. It's pretty similar to Moses. And there are a lot of similar. All right. All right. So let me just show you, before we build up to our Torah portion in Yitro, let me just show you a few places that Mount Sinai is mentioned where you might have missed it early on in Exodus. And the first one is Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. So let's start there. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. If you don't want to flip to all the pages, you can just trust me when I read them. But if you want to see it in the text, we're looking at Exodus 3, verse 1. Okay. Page 398. Perfect. Okay, so here's how it starts. Now, so Moses has left Egypt. He's already met met and married the daughter of Jethro, Zipporah, and he's already had 2 sons. And now he takes a new job where he's a shepherd. And it says, verse 1, chapter 3, Moses was grazing the sheep of Yitro, the father-in-law, the priest of Midian, in which we've already learned quite a bit about Yitro. Not only is he an idol worshiper, but he's a Kohen of the idol worshipers. But the idol worshipers of Midian. So now you want to ask the question, why does it matter that he's from Midian? Who is Midian? Midian is the son of Abraham. Midian's the son of Abraham. Abraham represents not idol worship. Abraham represents monotheism. But do you remember that after Sarah died, Abraham went back with this woman named Keturah, who Rashi says is Hagar, and they had more children. And one of those more children that Abraham had with this woman Keturah, who may or may not have been Hagar, was Midian. So if Jethro is a Kohen of Midian, is he necessarily a polytheist? Maybe. He's a monotheist. I don't know. But he comes from the tradition of the guy who invented or discovered the concept of monotheism. Maybe he didn't discover it, but he made it famous. Because there were other monotheists before Abraham. Who was monotheist before Abraham? Noah, Adam, Eve. I mean, there were a few. They weren't so good at it, and they couldn't sell it. But Abraham could sell it. All right, so anyway, now he runs into Midian, and he guided the sheep far into the wilderness. And he arrived at the mountain of God. So what's that? And if you look at it in Hebrew, it's Har HaElokim, the mountain of God. But Elohim, the plural name of God. So is Jethro interested in monotheism or polytheism? Because Elohim is a singular name for God, but it also comes with an im at the end, which indicates multiple. So maybe he's not quite certain. But there's a lot of stuff going on there. But then, not only do you have the mountain of God, but you have another name for that mountain, which is not Sinai. What is it? Chorev, right? Now, in Hebrew it says choreva, but the hey at the end means towards. It's called the hey hakivun. It's a contraction. It's adding 2 words. It's adding chorev and then the hey, which isn't changing the name of it. It's just adding the word towards onto the word. So chorev means choreb. Choreva means towards Horeb. It's not a different name. Okay, but that's what we're saying here, that this other mountain is also known as Chorev. Now, what is Rashi? I didn't bring this Rashi for you, but what does Rashi say about it? The Torah calls it such because of its role in the future. But at this time of the narrative, it was not really known as the mountain of God yet. And so it was known by one of these other names, Chorev. Now, here's something you could be interested in. What does Chorev mean? It can mean sword. It can also mean cut. What was cut at Mount Sinai? The covenant, the Brit, right? A cut. So something's cut there, which later on, that's why Chorev is one of the nicknames of Mount Sinai. So if you skip now on the sheet to the fourth source, Exodus Rabbah 2:4, look what it says here. He arrived at the mountain of God to Chorev. So now what does the Midrash tell you? Well, that mountain has 5 names. You could call it the mountain of God. You can call it Mount Bashan. You can call it Mount Gavnunim. You can call it Mount Chorev, but if you want, you can just call it Mount Sinai, the mountain of God, because it was there that Israel accepted the Holy One, blessed be He, as their God. And then it's going to tell you all the reasons for the other names. I prefer Gavnunim because it's as pure as cheese. But that's interesting to you, right? Because on Shavuot, we eat cheese, right? Cake, right? I mean, that's where that comes from. Okay. And then Mount Chorev, etc., as Ed pointed out, because it means sword. And also, okay, and then there's a little bit more that's going on there. Now, we'll get to Mount Sinai later. Don't worry about that for now. Okay, now, if you look at the second source, another midrash that basically says the same thing, and they came there to the riverbed of Eshkol, so called because, and Eshkol means a cluster, so called because by reason of the cluster of grapes, similarly as in Exodus 3:1, which is the verse we just looked at, and he came to the mountain of God to Chorev. So called because what would occur there in the future? What would occur there in the future is something with a sword, something being cut. And there was a message there for Jews and for non-Jews, but that's why, what I'm pointing out is that this is foreshadowing that already in chapter 3, Moses and Jethro do something at Mount Sinai. And for Moses, it involves schlepping a sheep there. Okay? Now, why is that interesting? Because it involves Moses, a sheep, and a sword, schlepping to a mountain. Now, what happened was, when God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham schlepped Isaac, who represented the sheep that was going to be sacrificed, and he had a chorev. So what do you have here? Moses, a sheep, a sword, and a mountain. And when Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac, you have Abraham, a sheep, Isaac represents the sacrifice, a mountain, and a sword. And this is a mirror image. You see that? So just as Isaac was the sacrifice that allowed for the covenant, what we call the unconditional covenant, to take place between God and Abraham, I will be your God and you will be my people and your children will be the stars of the sky. It's the first covenant. This is now what's paving the way for the second covenant. I'll give you a Torah, and if you follow the Torah, I'll be your God. Right, there are 2 covenants, the unconditional covenant, which God makes with Abraham, and the conditional covenant, which God makes with Moses. What's the condition? That you follow the Torah. Clear so far? See how that, okay. So I think already, most congregations, if you got that, just that, you would say, wow. But this isn't Boynton. This isn't Delray. We got more. All right. Okay, so let's go now. Chapter 4. I think it's verse 15, but let me just double check. Hold on, maybe it's not. Forget where the next verse is. Chapter 4, verse 27.
412.
Page 412. Now, we just pointed out that there's a connection between Yitro and Moses and Mount Sinai. Clear so far? Now, in verse 27 of chapter 4, I want to point out that there's also a relationship between Moses and Aaron and Mount Sinai. And as I continue to point these things out, you start to realize something very interesting about Mount Sinai. Okay, so look at verse 27. God said to Aaron, "Go to meet Moses to the wilderness." So he went and he encountered him, Bahar HaElohim, at the mountain of God, and he kissed him there. And Moses there told Aaron all the words that he said, and so forth. So I don't really have a heck of a lot more to add there, but the fact that he went to meet Aaron, and for whatever reason, they ended up at Mount Sinai, is interesting. Now we also know, Miller, I know you know this, where did Moses originally meet the burning bush? On top of Mount Sinai. Okay? So when we go to the scene of the burning bush, we find out that that's also at Chorev, and Chorev is Mount Sinai. So well before the Torah is given at Mount Sinai, we already know that there's something very interesting at Mount Sinai. That's all we're saying so far. Why? Because we just pointed out 3 different things that happened there, and one of them happens to mirror exactly what happened with Abraham and Isaac. Okay. All right, now, knowing all that, we can go to Yitro, chapter 19. So Exodus 19:1. Okay, so, Judy, so listen closely, guys. As Judy reads chapter 19, the first, several verses. Now, here's an issue. A lot of times during this week, we get to this, during this week of the year, we get to this Torah portion. And it happened last year as well. We had this Torah portion. And it has in it the phrase, al kanfei nesharim, on the wings of eagles. And so you think that means, especially last year, that this was a prediction that the Eagles are going to win the Super Bowl. And last year we were right. Now, I look closely at the rest of this Torah portion, and the only other team mentioned is the Rams. There are Rams in this Torah portion too. But they lost last week, and the Eagles lost the week before. And so you start to say, maybe the Torah really doesn't care who's going to win the Super Bowl. But last year it seemed pretty clear that the Torah was rooting for the Eagles. So I don't know this year. Good luck. I don't know. Anyone's here from Seattle? Chas v'shalom. All right. All right. So, but when we look now at chapter, starting with verse 1 of 19, please pay attention to when and how often the mountain of Sinai is the mountain in and of itself is mentioned, okay? All right, here we go.
On the 3rd new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain.
Okay, now, they're in Sinai. They encamped opposite the mountain, but the mountain is not called Sinai. But we're in Sinai, and we're by a mountain. Clear so far? Okay, let's keep going.
And Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel.
Okay, so already you've seen the voice from God comes from the mountain. Okay, or at least the direction of the mountain. Okay.
You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me.
Right, and that's where you would think we would have beat the 49ers, but we didn't. Okay.
Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples, indeed all the earth of mine. But you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Want to do it, Ken?
Yeah, a little bit more.
Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all the words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered as one, saying, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses brought back the people's words to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "I will come to you in a thick cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, and so trust you ever after." Then Moses reported the people's words to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and warn them to stay pure today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothes. Let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people on Mount Sinai."
Okay, and there it is. Now you have, for the first time, the mountain is referred to actually as Sinai. Okay. Okay, let's keep going a little bit more. Verse 12.
You shall set bounds for the people round about, saying, "Beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be either stoned or shot. Beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up on the mountain."
Okay, now, do you remember the ram's horn? This is why, if the Rams would have pulled it out last week, you would say this is an indication that they're going to win. But what is the significance of the ram's horn here? Well, when they didn't sacrifice Isaac, they replaced it with the ram. And that's where the shofar comes from. That's why it has to be a shofar, because the ram is what replaced there. And so now here also we have a ram. And so there's something going on there with that. Oh, in other words, it's continuing the mirror image. Okay, let's keep going.
Moses came down from the mountain to the people and warned the people to stay pure, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman." On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain, and a very loud blast of the horn. And all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for the Lord had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people not to break through to the Lord to gaze, lest many of them perish. The priests also who come near the Lord must purify themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." But Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you warned us, saying, 'Set bounds about the mountain and sanctify it.' So the Lord said to him, 'Go down and come back together with Aaron, but let not the priests or the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them.' And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them."
Okay, so what am I looking for now? Hang on, bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I want to, if you'll come back with me now to, we just saw everything that happened at the mountain, and that it's clear now that it's Mount Sinai. Okay. Okay. Okay, so if you just come back with me now to chapter 18. beginning with verse 9. Okay. So, okay. Now, if you look at, going back, what happens here is that in verse 5, in verse 7, Moses comes out to greet Jethro, and he bows and he kisses him. And then Moses, in verse 8, tells his father everything that God has done for Pharaoh in Egypt and for Israel's sake. And that includes the 10 plagues, and that includes the splitting of the sea, and that includes the giving of what's going to happen at Mount Sinai. But I want to point out that there are two names for God here that seem to be interchangeable, but are used at different times. So one is what we call the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name for God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the other one is Elohim. Right? So if you look now at verse 8, and if you can read the Hebrew, great. If not, I'll just point it out. But so he says here, "Vayisaper Moshe lechotno et kol asher asah Hashem." And Moses told his father-in-law everything that this four-letter name for God did. Okay? Now, Yitro might be saying, yeah, I call him Elohim because I like the plural ending. And Moses is saying, you know what I like? That singular one. You see the difference? So Moses says that this four-letter name that I like, here's what he did before us in front of Pharaoh and in front of Egypt on behalf of the Jews. And then Moses says, and God rescued us, using again God as the singular name of God. Okay, then comes verse 9. Vayichad Yitro. Yitro was excited. Al kol tova asher Hashem li Yisrael. And now Yitro's starting to use that singular name that he wasn't using before. Before, to him, the mountain was known as Har HaElohim. But now all of a sudden, he says, oh wow, God did all that? Interesting. And this is how you refer to him? Maybe I'm learning something here. Okay. And then, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe what Yitro says. Yitro, this polytheist, Vayomer Yitro, Baruch Hashem. Literally, it says Baruch Hashem. By the way, you'll notice that whenever Baruch Hashem is said in the Torah, it's never by a Jew. In Brooklyn, it's different. But in the Torah, it's only non-Jews. Every time you hear this phrase, it's Baruch Hashem, using the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name for God, who saved you from the land of Egypt and from the land of Pharaoh, etc., etc. Now you know. Okay, but now come back to verse 11. Ata yadati. Now I know. Ki gadol Hashem. That God is greater. Mikol ha-Elokim. Or actually here I would say Mikol ha-Elohim. He says, I know that your God is greater than all the other gods. Not that I know that there are no other gods. I know your God's better than the other gods. Right? Gadol. Bigger, stronger than the other gods. Okay. And then, what do you do when you're in the mood to love God? Bring a sacrifice. Okay, verse 12. So Jethro, in case you forgot his relationship to Moses, you're reminded here, Choten Moshe, the father-in-law of Moses, gives an offering. But who does he give the offering to? Elohim. Well, wait a minute. Are you figuring this out or not? So he said, I'm going to give the offering to God. But now he comes back and says, I know that your God, this Tetragrammaton, is greater than all the other Elohims, but I'm giving my sacrifice to Elohim. Okay. Vayavo Aaron. Aaron shows up, and all the other elders to eat bread with him. Lifnei ha-Elohim, before God. So, there's nothing wrong with Elohim. That's one of God's names too. But it's like when someone has two different nicknames that mean this different things but refer to the same person. And so, how do you know which one means which? Now, as far as the Torah is concerned, normally, what we say is one represents God's attribute of mercy, and one represents God's attribute of justice. One represents what we call rachamim, and one represents din. So when the verse is referring to God doing something in terms of mercy, it uses the tetragrammaton, the four-letter, what you would call the Y source. That's rachamim. The E source, Elokim, refers to din, judgment. So God is sometimes the one who brings judgment, and God is sometimes the one who brings mercy, but it's the same God. But he has two different attributes. That's how it's usually understood. Eileen? I'm sorry? Oh, right, exactly. Yeah. So that's God. That's how it's usually understood. Is that how Jethro's using it? I'm not necessarily sure. But there's something going on here, and you might take a look at it and say, well, we're not really sure if he's fully monotheist yet or not, which we won't find out later the truth about him until the book of Judges. That's a different class.
When Yitro says he's going to give a sacrifice to Elohim, even though he'd used the Yud He Vav He before that, maybe he's just kind of covering his options just in case.
Could be, yeah. Okay. So now let me ask you one more thing. Going back to the mountain, what we see every time is that the mountain is called Har HaElohim. And Elohim is the one that deals with judgment. Because Mount Sinai we think of as a place of law, as a place where the Torah comes from. Mount Zion in Jerusalem is where you offer the sacrifices to get the mercy, the sin offerings. So when I think of Mount Sinai, I think of God's judgment. Here's the law. But if I mess up on the law, I go to Mount Zion in Jerusalem, where the Holy Temple is, I offer my sacrifice and I get forgiven. So if I had to pick which one's which, I would probably say that Sinai is the place of judgment, and that's why it's called Har HaElohim. However, it takes on a different name, ultimately, which is Sinai. So where does the name Sinai come from? What does Sinai mean? Well, Sinai is the same letters and the same root as another word we saw in the Torah, sneh. What's a sneh? A sneh is a burning bush. And the burning bush was on Mount Sinai. So we already saw a foreshadowing that this mountain is going to take on a different name because the burning bush, the sneh, with a samech, took place on top of Mount Sinai. So now we see Sinai and we say, okay, it sounds just like the burning bush, but there's another thing going on here. So, I don't know if you know this, but there's some people who don't like Jews. All right. Why? Well, essentially, we're the moral guide rails for the world. And if you don't like morality, then you're not going to like Jews. But how do I know that? So if you look on the second sheet, where from the Talmud, where it says Bavli Shabbat 89a. Bavli Shabbat 89a. Okay, Jeff, would you mind reading that one? Rav Chisda?
As Rav Hista and Rabbah, son of Rav Huna, both said, "What is the reason it is called Mount Sinai? It is because it is a mountain upon which hatred, Sina, for the nations of the world descended because they did not accept the Torah."
Okay, so Sinai means it's a geographical name, but it also happens to be connected to the word for the burning bush. But Sinai sounds a little bit like Sin'ah. Sin'ah means hatred. And so the rabbis in the Talmud, even though they're spelled differently, Sin'ah is spelled with a sin and not a samech. But even still, the rabbis used to play with that kind of thing and said, hatred came into the world when the Torah was given to us and nobody else.
It was a reason for the destruction of the temple.
Right. Well, that's sinat chinam. Yeah, you have to add the chinam.
Hatred.
That's baseless hatred. This is hatred for a reason. Because we got the Torah and they didn't. In other words, they hate us because they ain't us. Never heard that? All right. All right. You can take it or leave it, but that's what the Talmud says.
I just wanted to mention in the Shema, all the instances where God is mentioned is with the tetragram. So assuming it's a prayer of mercy rather than judgment.
Yeah, but it's also Shema. I mean, the theme of the Shema is monotheism. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So you want to use a singular name. But it also envelops Rachamim, mercy, no doubt. Okay, next source, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. This is a Midrash, 45. Les, would you mind reading that where it says Rabbi Eliezer of Modi'in?
Rabbi Eliezer of Modin said, "From the day when the heavens and the earth were created, the name of the mountain was Horeb. When the Holy One, blessed be he, was revealed unto Moses out of the thorn bush, because of the word for the thorn bush, Sinai was called Sinai, and that is Horeb. And whence do we know that Israel accepted the Torah at Mount Horeb? Because it is said, the day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb."
Okay, right. Now, who's Yitro again? Yitro is a Kohen Midian. He's a priest of Midian. Where was Midian? Moses, it makes it sound like he left Egypt and he was in Midian, as if he walked, from Pinecrest to Coral Gables. And he crossed Red Road, and all of a sudden, I'm in Pinecrest, I'm in Coral Gables, or South Miami, or whatever. You don't just go, I'm in Egypt, I'm in Midian. So where exactly was Midian? It's hard to say. But generally, if you think about, the very bottom of Israel where Eilat is, you have there the port of Aqaba. And scholars generally note that Midian was a little bit south of Aqaba. So a little bit south of where Eilat is, which is towards the Sinai. That is into the Sinai. Now, how far is it from there to Mount Sinai? It's not that far. From Cairo to Aqaba is a 12-hour car ride, a 12-hour bus ride. I know because I did it once. So it's not like he's going from Turkey to Iraq, or something. It's within the same period. So somewhere south of Aqaba, and I don't know how far south, but the scholars generally think Midian's somewhere in there. It's in that same region. This where Mount Sinai is and where Midian is. So it's not surprising that he would run into Jethro, who was a Midianite, in and around Mount Sinai. And that all this action would take place in and around Mount Sinai. Okay. One more midrash. This one's from the Tanchuma, and it's a little bit longer. And then we're going to get to something very, very... We need all of this to get to the good stuff. So, one more midrash. Annabelle, would you mind reading the Tanchuma? He said to him...
He said to him, all these years Aaron has prophesied to them. So am I now to go to them in my brother's domain so that he will be upset? For that reason Moses did not desire to go. The Holy One said to him, your brother Aaron will not be upset over this matter. Rather, he will be happy.
Okay, so Moses didn't want to be the leader. And he didn't want... When he found out that he was going to be the leader, where did that happen? At the burning bush. Where was the burning bush? On top of Mount Sinai. When Moses and Aaron reunite, where is it? Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai is the place where Moses finds out he's going to be superior to Aaron. And Moses didn't want to be the leader, according to this very famous midrash here, because his brother Aaron was already been a prophet for 20 years and was older than him. And Moses didn't want to hurt Aaron's feelings. So at Mount Sinai, Moses wasn't interested in that because it would have become a place of confrontation and a place of judgment. I'm picking Moses and not you, Aaron. And Moses wasn't interested in that. But all of that place of confrontation happened at Mount Sinai. And so what is God now about to tell Moses? Don't worry. You think that Aaron's going to be really upset that I'm not picking him? He's going to love it. Why? So let's look. Okay, so here's what's going on. Annabella?
Where did I leave off? Rather, he will be happy.
See, he's going to love it.
You yourself know that he's going out for a meeting with you. It is so stated in Exodus 4:14. See, he is setting out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be happy in his heart.
Right, and we looked at that Exodus 4:14, which said, that, and then in 15 that said, you're going to meet at Mount Sinai, at the Har HaElohim. Okay.
Not in his mouth alone, but in his heart more than his mouth. When he sees you, he will be happy in his heart. Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai said, the heart that was happy at his brother's greatness shall put on Urim and Tumim, as stated in Exodus 28:30. And inside the breastplate of judgment you shall put the Urim and Tumim, so that they shall be upon Aaron's heart, ergo, and also see he is setting out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be happy in his heart.
Okay, why is he going to be happy in his heart? Because he's getting a promotion too. He's going to become the high priest. He's going to be the one who's going to get to wear the Urim and Tumim, the breastplate. Now, Moses represents Torah. He's the one who gets the Torah. Representing Torah means representing Din.
Justice.
Aaron represents the sacrifices where you get repentance for the sins that you've done. You guys can't exist unless you're working together. One of you is doing one job and the other is doing the other. And Moses thought, I'm the only job that's important. And God's saying to him, no. You're nothing without him. I need the two of you. I need the Din and the Rachamim. You represent Mount Sinai. He represents Mount Zion, where the Holy Temple is going to be, where all the sacrifices are going to be. So don't worry about him. Actually, he's getting kind of a better job than you, because Zion is superior to Sinai. So don't worry about it. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, let's keep going.
It is therefore stated in Exodus 4:27, go into the desert to meet Moses. Ergo, if only you could be to me like a brother, like Moses and Aaron who loved each other. If I met you outside, I would kiss you. So he went to meet him on the mountain of God and kissed him.
Right, and they end up kissing because that kiss represents the coming together of Din and Rachamim. But what does it also represent? The coming together of two of God's names into one. Because it is one, just has two attributes. But they're putting them together. Clear so far? Okay. Now this is where it gets amazing. You would have always thought that the Torah should come from Mount Zion and not Mount Sinai. It doesn't make sense that the Torah should not be given in the land of Israel. And we have a problem with that. And every time we open the ark, we're not willing to say, from out of Sinai came forth the Torah. We just can't bring ourselves to do it. So instead of saying, Ki me Sinai teitzei Torah, we change it to Ki me Zion, Zion, Mount Zion. From Mount Zion comes forth the Torah. But that makes no sense. We just see, no, it doesn't. It comes from Mount Sinai. Everybody knows that. But still, Ki me Zion teitzei Torah. From out of Zion comes forth the Torah. Okay, now, how do we get away with that? So, you know what challah is? Why do we have challah on Shabbat? What's challah? It's bread. It's bread. But when you're making challah, you take a piece off, and it's as if a part that you would give to the portion that goes to the priests. So we don't have priests anymore, so you're supposed to burn it. If you don't want to burn it, it's up to you. But challah doesn't refer to the bread. The bread is called isa. Dough is isa. Challah doesn't mean bread. Lechem is bread. Challah is the piece you take off that separates and goes to the priests. Challah means like a portion that goes to the priest. Lechem is, nobody says, ha-motzi challah. Nobody says that. You say motzi lechem. Right? So, that's challah. So what if I told you, when you take something off and separate it, and then it goes to the priests. Who represents the priests? Aaron. So watch this. You're not going to believe this. But wait, before we... yeah, we don't need it. Okay, so Midrash Tehillim 87:2. Watch this. This is going to knock your socks off, I think. Another interpretation of the foundation of the world is based on the holy mountains, Mount Sinai and Mount Moriah, which are symbols of holiness. Now, Mount Moriah is another name for Mount Zion. Okay? Moriah, Morah is teacher. Morah rhymes with Torah. Yah, Moriah, Yah means God. The teachings of God. That's another name for Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and it is the name that's used when God tells Abraham to take Isaac there. That's how we know that Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac in the place where the Holy Temple would later be built. That's why they built the Holy Temple there. Because that's the place that was inaugurated when Abraham put Isaac on the altar. Which means to say this is the place where the altar should be when you ultimately build the Holy Temple. But my point is that Mount Zion and Mount Moriah refer to the same place, which Jews call today the Temple Mount, or Har Habayit. Muslims call it the Noble Sanctuary. Okay, but that's where the dome is, Dome of the Rock. Okay, so Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, same thing. So watch this. They're both symbols of holiness. Rabbi Pinchas, citing Rabbi Reuven, said that God will bring Jerusalem to the forefront and place it on Mount Sinai, Mount Tabor, and Mount Carmel. And so forget about Mount Tabor and Mount Carmel for a second. But in other places, the Midrash explains it this way, in that God took a piece of challah from Mount Moriah and placed it at Mount Tabor, Mount Carmel, and Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is in and of itself a piece of Mount Zion. I expected more of a reaction. God actually sliced off a piece of Mount Zion and put it as Mount Sinai. Why? Because I can't just give you the Torah as din. You'll never accept it. I had to take some of that rachamim from Jerusalem and place it there, which is why Aaron and Moses have to come together at Mount Sinai. Moses is already there, but the idea of Aaron coming there is with the Torah telling us that God took a piece of what Aaron represents, Mount Zion, and placed it on Mount Sinai. Now, how do I know that? How do I know that even more? That this is Aaron and Moses. The one moment of perfection in the world was that moment called Revelation when God revealed himself to everybody. Which is, by the way, why hospitals are called Mount Sinai. Because all the problems of the world, including all ailments of the world, were healed at Mount Sinai. Everyone who had any kind of ailment at Mount Sinai was healed just like that. Which is why a lot of hospitals are now called Mount Sinai. Okay? Now, what we're doing really is combining at Mount Sinai the two names of God. The Yud-Keh, Vav-Keh, and Elohim. Because we're combining and saying the world can't exist just with God's judgment, everyone would be destroyed because we sin all the time and we would just all be dead right away. But if you combine God's mercy with it, then we can survive. So Judaism is about trying to get back. Ever since that moment of perfection at Mount Sinai, Judaism is about trying to get back to that moment of perfection. We haven't gotten there yet. But someday we will, and when we will, that moment will be called the Messianic era. Okay? With me so far? Now, as if you weren't already amazed, here's where it all comes together. Look at Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer 29. The second to last source. Okay, so, well, before let me just give this a little bit of explanation. At a bris or at a seder, Eliyahu shows up. So Eliyahu shows up, and the midrash is because, why does he come to those events? I tell this all the time at brises. Eliyahu goes out at the end of his life and says, I've given up. I'm ready to die because the Jewish people don't listen to me and they're worshiping idols. And God says to Eliyahu, who do you think you are? You don't decide when you die. In fact, you're never going to die. And he sends, in the book of Samuel, he sends a chariot for Eliyahu, and it picks him up, and he goes to heaven. But when he gets to heaven, the Midrash says that God says to him, I'm going to show you to never give up on the Jewish people. And the punishment is you're going to have to go to every bris and schlep to every seder to see that the Jewish people are going to continue to raise their kids as Jewish and continue to celebrate the Seder, and that's why he has to show up, and that's why he's annoyed by the time he gets there. He's also a little drunk because he's been to 400,000 other Seders, and, after that many sips of wine, he's whatever, but that's why he shows up. But there's more to it. There's a whole nother layer of who Eliyahu is. And when God is telling him this, so by the way, that's what it says in this here, in the Midrash, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, hence the sages institute the custom, the people should have a seat of honor for the messenger of the covenant. That's Eliyahu, to see that the covenant will never be broken. Eliyahu may be remembered for good, right? Eliyahu Zachor Latov is called the messenger of the covenant, as it says, and the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in, behold, he cometh. But where does this story come from? 1 Kings. Look at this. He rose and ate and drank. And with strength from that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights. as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. In other words, Eliyahu shows up at Mount Sinai. There he went into a cave, and there he spent the night. Then the word of God came to him. Why are you here, Elijah? He said, I am moved by zeal for the eternal, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life. So, everyone wants to kill Elijah because he's yelling at them for not following God, and they're worshiping they're worshiping idols, and all of a sudden Eliyahu, who lived in Haifa, where Haifa is, Mount Carmel, happens to show up where? At Mount Sinai. And now that he's, right, we see Horeb, but he's at Mount Sinai, and this is the story where God comes by him, and there's thunder and lightning, and it says, but God's voice wasn't in the thunder. And there, all kinds of fire and hurricane, and finally said, and then there was a still small sound, and God's voice was in the still small, that famous story? That's this story. And where did Eliyahu hear this story? At Mount Sinai. Why Mount Sinai? Because everyone was chasing him for din, to kill him, but he needed some rachamim. He ends up at Mount Sinai, and he combines din and rachamim. Now, when the Messiah comes, you know who's supposed to be escorting the Messiah? Elijah. That's Eliyahu. Now, where's the Messiah going to come from? Have you ever been to a funeral where we pour dirt from the Mount of Olives on top of the grave? You know why we do that? Because they say when the Messiah comes, all the people are buried on the Mount of Olives, they'll be resurrected, because that's where the Messiah is going to come from the Mount of Olives, which leads to Mount Moriah. It's right behind. You know where the Intercontinental Hotel used to be? That's what you can see right behind where the Holy Temple was. Elijah's going to be escorting a descendant of King David on a donkey that's going to come into the old city of Jerusalem onto Mount Moriah. Who's going to lead it? Elijah. Why Elijah? Because you need someone who can bring together din and rachamim. That's him. You need someone who can be Aaron and Moses at Mount Sinai. Why at Mount Sinai? Because Mount Sinai and Mount Zion are the same thing, right? God took Mount Zion and put it on Mount Sinai. And that's why the name Eliyahu, it's not really a name. It's a combination of Elohim and the Yud He Vav He. That's what Eliyahu is. Eliyahu is not a person. Eliyahu is what we think of when we combine two of God's names together. Eliyahu, Elohim, Yud He Vav. Eliyahu is not a person or a name. It's the combination of Zion and Mount Sinai. That's what Eliyahu represents. And what Eliyahu represents is getting back to that moment at Mount Sinai, which is actually Mount Zion, when everything was perfect at Revelation, which we'll get back when Eliyahu, which represents both, walks down Mount Zion and brings in the Messianic era, which is what we're waiting for, a return at Zion to Sinai. Amen.
Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check.
Thank you.